The arena erupts in thunderous applause as dust swirls around the motionless figure of Tornado Alley, the most feared bull in professional rodeo. For 8 endless seconds, the massive black beast had twisted and bucked with the fury of a natural disaster, his 2,000-pound frame launching skyward in bone-crushing spirals that had sent 37 riders to the hospital over 3 seasons. Now he stands perfectly still, sides heaving, as if acknowledging defeat for the first time in his legendary career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Atop his broad back, a small figure in worn leather chaps sits with the poise of someone born to this moment. Her grip on the rope remains steady, her free arm extended in perfect form, her body moving in harmony with the bull's final, half-hearted hop. The timer flashes 12 seconds, a number that will be talked about in rodeo circles for decades to come. But in the stands of the Billings County Fair just 6 months earlier, the same woman had been laughed out of the arena, dismissed as a has-been trying to relive glory days that most believed had never existed at all. The morning sun casts long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the Triple Diamond Ranch, painting the Montana landscape in shades of gold and amber that photographers spend lifetimes trying to capture. In the modest trailer that serves as both home and office for the ranch's livestock operations, Sarah Mitchell moves through her morning routine with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to make every motion count. At 28, she carries herself with the careful posture of someone whose body has absorbed more punishment than most people endure in a lifetime, though few would guess it from watching her deliberate, measured movements. Her appearance offers no hint of the fire that once burned bright enough to illuminate arena after arena across the western states. Sandy brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, work boots scuffed from genuine labor rather than fashion, jeans that have been mended more than once with patches that prioritize function over appearance. She moves through the cramped space with practiced navigation, avoiding the low-hanging cabinet that has caught her shoulder countless times and stepping automatically around the loose floorboard that squeaks if pressure is applied to its left edge. The trailer tells the story of someone who has learned to live within diminished circumstances without complaint. A small television sits atop a dresser that has seen better decades, its screen often flickering when the wind picks up and disturbs the ancient antenna. The kitchenette contains the bare essentials, a coffee maker that gurgles and protests with each use, a microwave with a door that requires precise alignment to close properly, and a refrigerator that hums constantly but keeps food adequately cold. Everything functions, nothing thrives, a perfect metaphor for the life Sarah has constructed around the ashes of dreams she rarely allows herself to remember. But hidden beneath the surface normalcy of her current existence lie traces of a different story. In the single closet that houses her modest wardrobe, pushed far to the back behind practical work shirts and spare jeans, hangs a garment bag that remains perpetually zipped. Inside, though no visitor would ever know, rests a competition shirt of deep emerald green, its fabric still crisp despite the years, its silver threading catching light even in darkness. The shirt bears the logo of the National Women's Rodeo Association, and beneath that logo, embroidered in gold thread that has never tarnished, are the words, Champion All-Around Cowgirl 2019. Sarah's morning begins before dawn, as it has every day for the past 4 years since she accepted the position of livestock coordinator at Triple Diamond. The ranch, owned by the Morrison family for 3 generations, operates on the margins of profitability in an industry where margins determine survival. Her job encompasses feeding schedules for over 200 head of cattle, maintenance coordination for equipment that breaks down with clockwork regularity, and the endless paperwork that accompanies any agricultural operation in the modern era. She performs these duties with methodical competence, earning the quiet respect of the ranch hands who appreciate someone willing to work alongside them rather than merely supervise from a distance. The other employees at Triple Diamond see Sarah as dependable but unremarkable. She arrives early, stays late when necessary, and handles crisis situations with a calm that suggests either natural temperament or hard-won experience. When cattle break through fencing during summer storms, she can be found in the rain, helping to guide them back to safety. When the ancient hay baler finally surrenders to mechanical fatigue, she spends her lunch breaks researching replacement parts and negotiating with suppliers who have learned to respect her knowledge of equipment specifications. Her colleagues appreciate her reliability, but rarely seek her company during the informal gatherings that occur after particularly challenging days. This suits Sarah perfectly. She has grown comfortable with the invisibility that comes from being competent without being flashy, necessary without being indispensable. It represents a dramatic departure from a time when her name appeared regularly in rodeo publications, when photographers captured her image mid-ride on bulls whose reputations were built on the careers they had ended, when announcers spoke her name with the reverence reserved for athletes who transcend their sport to become legends. In her trailer's single bedroom, pushed beneath the narrow bed where space is at a premium, sits a cardboard box that Sarah has not opened in over 3 years. The box contains a collection of belt buckles, each one representing a victory at venues across the American West, prize money certificates, yellowed with age but still bearing impressive dollar amounts, photographs from competitions where she wore the emerald shirt with pride, her face beaming with the confidence of someone who had found her calling and excelled beyond all reasonable expectations. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper that she changes annually despite never looking at its contents, lies a trophy that stands nearly 2 feet tall, its brass plate reading Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. Bull Riding Champion, Sarah Mitchell to 2019. The weight of that trophy, both physical and metaphorical, had once represented everything Sarah believed about herself and her place in the world. Bull riding, particularly for women, existed on the margins of professional rodeo, a sport dominated by men who often viewed female competitors as novelties rather than legitimate athletes. Sarah had spent her teenage years and early 20s proving that assessment wrong, 1 8-second ride at a time. She had endured broken ribs, dislocated shoulders, concussions that left her dizzy for weeks, and countless other injuries that came with the territory of climbing onto animals bred for size, strength, and an innate desire to remove anything from their backs through whatever means necessary. But the injuries had been acceptable costs for the rush that came with perfect rides, those moments when human determination and animal power achieved a harmony that elevated both beyond their individual capabilities. Sarah had possessed an almost supernatural ability to read bulls, to anticipate their movements and adjust her position microseconds before they exploded into their next bone-jarring maneuver. Other riders studied video footage for hours, analyzing patterns and developing strategies. Sarah relied on instinct, on a connection with the animals that she could never adequately explain to reporters who invariably asked about her unusual success in a field where women rarely competed and even more rarely won. Her rise through the ranks had been meteoric by rodeo standards, though it represented years of grinding work that took her from small-town competitions to regional championships to national recognition. She had slept in her truck more nights than she could count, survived on gas station food and the occasional meal provided by fellow competitors who respected her dedication, if not always her presence in their traditionally male domain. Prize money went immediately back into travel expenses, entry fees, and the medical bills that accumulated despite her relatively fortunate record with serious injuries. The 2019 season had been her breakthrough year, the culmination of everything she had worked toward since the first time she had watched a bull rider at her local county fair and known with the certainty that only comes to people in moments of true calling, that she had found her purpose. Victory followed victory as she dominated competitions across multiple states, her consistency and skill earning recognition from commentators who had initially viewed her as an interesting sidebar to the main events. The championship trophy had been presented to her on a crisp October evening in Las Vegas, in front of a crowd that had gradually transformed from skeptical to enthusiastic as her season progressed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Standing on that platform, holding hardware that represented years of sacrifice and determination, Sarah had felt the profound satisfaction that comes from achieving goals that others had deemed impossible. She was 24 years old, at the peak of her physical abilities, and seemingly positioned for a career that could redefine what was possible for women in professional rodeo. That feeling had lasted exactly 4 months. The accident, as she would later think of it, though that term suggested randomness rather than the calculated cruelty she had experienced, occurred during what should have been a routine competition in Phoenix. The bull, a well-known animal called Desert Storm, had a reputation for challenging but fair rides. Sarah had drawn him twice before, completing successful 8-second rides that earned respectable scores without causing unusual difficulty. She had approached the ride with confidence born of familiarity, checking her equipment with the same methodical attention to detail that had kept her safer than many of her competitors. What happened next would be captured on video from multiple angles, though the footage would later disappear from official records through methods that Sarah never fully understood. The rigging that secured her to bull had been tampered with, altered in ways that were subtle enough to escape casual inspection but devastating in their impact. Instead of providing the secure connection that allowed riders to maintain position during the bull's movements, the equipment had been designed to fail at a precisely calculated moment, sending Sarah into a fall that positioned her directly beneath Desert Storm's hooves. The injuries were severe enough to require 3 surgeries and months of rehabilitation. But worse than the physical damage was the systematic destruction of her reputation that began while she was still unconscious. In the hospital, stories appeared in rodeo publications suggesting that she had been using illegal equipment modifications to gain advantages over other competitors. Anonymous sources claimed that her previous victories had been achieved through methods that violated competition rules. By the time Sarah was physically capable of defending herself, the narrative had solidified into accepted truth within the tight-knit rodeo community. The investigation that followed was thorough in appearance but predetermined in outcome. Equipment that could have proven tampering mysteriously disappeared from the competition grounds. Video footage developed technical problems that rendered crucial moments impossible to analyze. Witnesses who had initially supported Sarah's account gradually changed their testimonies or became unavailable for follow-up interviews. The official report concluded that equipment failure had resulted from improper maintenance by the rider, effectively ending her career while clearing all other parties of responsibility. Sarah's attempts to continue competing were met with a wall of institutional resistance that proved more effective than any physical barrier. Entry fees were mysteriously processed incorrectly, resulting in missed deadlines. Equipment inspections found minor violations that had been overlooked for other competitors throughout the season. Most devastatingly, other riders began to avoid her, fearing that association with someone labeled as a cheater would damage their own reputations in a sport where honor and fair play were supposedly paramount values. The isolation had been more crushing than the physical injuries. Sarah had spent years building relationships within the rodeo community, friendships forged through shared experiences that only people who had faced down 2,000-pound bulls could fully understand. Watching those relationships dissolve under pressure from forces she could not even identify had taught her lessons about loyalty and courage that no amount of physical bravery had prepared her for. Within 18 months of her championship victory, Sarah Mitchell had become a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. Whispered conversations in arena corridors spoke of the woman who had risen too high too fast, who had compromised her integrity in pursuit of glory that rightfully belonged to others. The details of these stories varied with each telling, but the essential narrative remained constant. Sarah Mitchell was not someone to be trusted, emulated, or welcomed in respectable rodeo circles. She had tried, briefly, to rebuild her career at smaller venues where her reputation might not have preceded her. But the network of professional rodeo is surprisingly small, and stories travel faster than any rider ever could. Competitions that had once welcomed her entry found reasons to exclude her. Sponsors who had been eager to associate with a rising star suddenly discovered that budget constraints prevented any new partnerships. Even equipment suppliers began treating her with the polite distance reserved for customers whose business was no longer particularly valued. The final blow had come during a regional competition in Colorado, where Sarah had hoped to demonstrate that her skills remained intact despite the controversy surrounding her past. She had drawn a bull known for straightforward, honest rides, not the most challenging animal in the lineup, but one that would allow her to showcase her technique without unnecessary risk. The ride itself had been textbook perfect, 8 seconds of controlled precision that reminded everyone present why she had once been considered among the sport's elite competitors. But as she dismounted and began walking toward the arena exit, a voice from the stands had carried clearly over the general crowd noise. "There goes Sarah Mitchell, still trying to prove she belongs somewhere she never should have been in the first place." The comment had been followed by laughter and murmured agreement from nearby spectators, people who had once cheered her performances, but now viewed her presence as an unwelcome reminder of standards they believed she had violated. Sarah had continued walking, her expression unchanged, but something fundamental had broken inside her that day. Not her spirit that had proven remarkably resilient throughout months of professional and personal destruction. Instead, it was her willingness to continue fighting for acceptance from people who had already decided she was unworthy of it. The realization had brought an unexpected sense of relief, the freedom that comes from finally accepting a reality that no amount of effort can change. She had driven straight from that Colorado arena to the Triple Diamond Ranch, responding to a classified advertisement for a livestock coordinator that required no references from the rodeo community. The interview had been conducted by Tom Morrison, the ranch's second-generation owner, who cared more about her obvious knowledge of cattle behavior than her background in competitive sports. He had offered her the position on the spot, along with the trailer that would serve as her new home and a salary that, while modest, provided stability she had not experienced in years. The transition from professional athlete to ranch employee had been easier than Sarah had anticipated. Physical work suited her, providing an outlet for energy that had once been channeled into 8-second bursts of controlled violence atop bucking bulls. The cattle, unlike the human beings she had dealt with during her rodeo career, responded to competence without judgment or hidden agendas. They required feeding regardless of her past controversies, medical attention that had nothing to do with her reputation, and handling that rewarded skill without concern for the politics that had destroyed her previous life. Her days at Triple Diamond followed a rhythm that had become comforting in its predictability. Morning rounds began before sunrise, checking on animals and identifying any that showed signs of illness or injury. Feeding schedules were coordinated with weather patterns and seasonal requirements, ensuring that nutrition levels remained optimal throughout the year. Equipment maintenance consumed hours that passed quickly when focused on mechanical problems that yielded to patience and proper tools rather than the complex social dynamics she had never fully mastered. The work was honest in ways that competition never had been. Success was measured in the health of the animals under her care, the efficiency of operations she coordinated, and the gradual improvements she implemented to systems that had functioned adequately but could always be optimized. Tom Morrison expressed appreciation for her contributions without fanfare, acknowledging her competence through increased responsibilities rather than elaborate praise. It was a professional relationship built on mutual respect and clear expectations, refreshingly free from the undercurrents of suspicion and political maneuvering that had characterized her final years in rodeo. But late at night, alone in her trailer with only the sounds of cattle settling for the evening and the distant hum of highway traffic, Sarah sometimes found herself standing at the small window that faced west toward the mountains. On clear evenings, she could see the lights of Billings in the distance, where the county fairgrounds hosted rodeo competitions every summer. The lights were too far away to reveal details, but she knew the layout of those arenas as well as she knew the scars on her own hands. She could visualize the chutes where riders prepared for their 8 seconds of truth, the gates where bulls waited with patient malevolence, the sandy surfaces that had cushioned her falls and celebrated her triumphs in equal measure. During those quiet moments, Sarah allowed herself to remember not the betrayal and humiliation that had ended her career, but the pure joy that had originally drawn her to bull riding. The sensation of perfect balance achieved despite impossible circumstances. The split-second decisions that meant the difference between victory and disaster. The rare moments when human determination and animal power created something larger than the sum of their individual parts. When 8 seconds stretched into infinity and emerged as art rather than mere competition. She remembered her first successful ride on a truly challenging bull, a moment that had occurred at a small-town rodeo when she was 19 years old. The animal had been a local legend, an aging veteran whose reputation was built on a near-perfect record of unseating riders within the first 3 seconds. Sarah had drawn him through sheer luck of the lottery system, and older competitors had offered condolences rather than congratulations when the matchup was announced. But something had clicked during those 8 seconds, a connection that transcended technique or training. The bull's movements had felt predictable despite their violence, as if she could anticipate his next maneuver through some form of communication that required no words or conscious thought. When the buzzer sounded and she dismounted safely, the crowd's surprise had been audible even over the general arena noise. More importantly, she had felt a certainty about her future that would guide every major decision for the next 5 years. That certainty had sustained her through countless injuries, financial struggles, and the casual dismissal she encountered from people who believed women had no place in professional bull riding. It had motivated the countless hours of physical conditioning required to compete with men who possessed natural advantages in size and strength. It had justified the sacrifices that left her isolated from peers her age who were building conventional careers and relationships while she chased an impossible dream. Across dusty arenas from Montana to Texas, even now 4 years after her last official ride, Sarah could feel echoes of that certainty stirring when she watched footage of current competitions on the small television in her trailer. Her body still remembered the precise timing required for optimal dismounts, the subtle weight shifts that could mean the difference between maintaining position and losing control entirely. Muscle memory retained the knowledge of how to read an animal's intentions through the tension in its shoulders, the rhythm of its breathing, the almost imperceptible gathering of energy that preceded explosive movement. But such moments of remembrance always ended with the harsh return to present reality. The rodeo world had moved on without her, developing new stars and creating fresh legends, while her name faded from memory or was remembered only as a cautionary tale. The bulls that had once carried her to championship glory were now either retired or serving as stepping stones for riders who had never heard of Sarah Mitchell or who knew her only through distorted stories that bore little resemblance to the truth. The isolation she had chosen at Triple Diamond served as protection against the casual cruelties that came with remaining visible in a community that had rejected her. Here, Surrounded by animals that cared nothing for human politics and colleagues who measured her worth through daily contributions rather than past controversies, she had found a peace that compensated for the dreams she had been forced to abandon. It was not the life she had once envisioned, but it was honest work performed for honest pay among people who valued competence over reputation. Yet sometimes, particularly during the summer months when rodeo season reached its peak and local radio stations carried updates from competitions throughout the region, Sarah felt the familiar stirring of something that had never been fully extinguished. The desire to prove herself, to demonstrate that the skills that had once made her a champion remained intact despite years of disuse. The longing to experience once more the perfect harmony between human determination and animal power that had defined the best moments of her career. The need to show, if only to herself, that Sarah Mitchell was more than the sum of the controversies that had destroyed her public life. These feelings typically passed quickly, overwhelmed by the practical realities of her current situation. She was 28 years old, an age when most bull riders were already considering retirement due to the accumulated damage that came with the sport. Her body, while still strong from ranch work, lacked the specific conditioning required for professional competition. Most significantly, she had no pathway back into the organized rodeo world that had made clear her permanent exclusion from its ranks. But as summer deepened and the sound of distant cheering occasionally carried across the prairie from the Billings County Fairgrounds, Sarah found herself remembering not just the joy of competition, but the responsibility that had come with her. Brief period of prominence. Young women had written letters telling her that her success had inspired them to pursue their own impossible dreams. Parents had approached her at competitions to express gratitude for providing their daughters with proof that barriers could be broken through determination and skill. She wondered sometimes what those people thought of her now, whether they believed the stories that had circulated about her character and methods, whether young women who had once seen her as proof of possibility now viewed her as evidence that some barriers existed for good reasons, whether her fall from grace had discouraged others from attempting to follow the path she had briefly blazed through professional rodeo's male-dominated landscape. These concerns might have remained merely philosophical, if not for an encounter that occurred on a sweltering July afternoon when Sarah was repairing fence line damaged by cattle, seeking shade during a particularly intense heat wave. A pickup truck had pulled onto the ranch's main road, moving slowly as if the driver was looking for something specific. Sarah had continued working, assuming the vehicle belonged to a delivery service or potential customer, seeking to speak with Tom Morrison about livestock purchases. But the truck had stopped near her work area, and a woman approximately her own age had emerged carrying what appeared to be a newspaper or magazine. The stranger had approached with the cautious confidence of someone who had traveled a significant distance for a specific purpose, but was no longer certain that purpose remained valid. "Excuse me," the woman had said, her voice carrying traces of a Texas accent that Sarah's ear immediately identified, despite years away from competition circuits. "I'm looking for Sarah Mitchell. I was told she works here." Sarah had straightened slowly, setting down her wire cutters while evaluating the stranger's appearance and demeanor. The woman wore clean jeans and boots that suggested familiarity with ranch work but lacked the worn edges that came from daily use. Her truck was newer than most working vehicles, well-maintained in ways that suggested adequate financial resources. Most tellingly, she carried herself with the particular combination of confidence and caution that Sarah recognized in people associated with professional rodeo. "That depends on who's asking," Sarah had replied carefully, prepared to claim ignorance if the conversation took unwelcome directions. The stranger had smiled then, an expression that transformed her entire appearance from businesslike to genuinely warm. "My name is Rebecca Torres. I run a small training facility outside Austin. I've been looking for you for quite a while." The statement had triggered immediate wariness in Sarah, who had learned to be suspicious of anyone who sought her out for reasons related to her past career. Too many conversations over the years had begun with friendly approaches and ended with requests for information that could further damage her already destroyed reputation. "I'm not interested in interviews or statements about anything that happened in my previous line of work," Sarah had said firmly. "If that's what you're looking for, you've wasted a trip." Rebecca had shaken her head quickly, holding up both hands in a gesture of peaceful intentions. "Nothing like that. Actually, I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in helping with a project I'm working on. Something that doesn't involve any official competition or public exposure." Despite herself, Sarah had felt a stirring of curiosity. The careful way Rebecca phrased her offer suggested familiarity with the circumstances that had led to Sarah's exile from professional rodeo. More intriguingly, it implied that those circumstances might not have destroyed her credibility with everyone who understood the sport. "What kind of project?" Sarah had asked, leaning against the fence post while maintaining physical distance that could be quickly increased if the conversation took uncomfortable directions. Rebecca had glanced around the ranch, taking in the rolling pastures and distant mountains before responding. "I work with bulls that have been retired from competition for various reasons. Some are too old, some have injuries that make them unsuitable for professional events, and some are just too unpredictable for most riders to handle safely. I help them transition to different types of work-breeding programs, training purposes, sometimes just providing them with comfortable retirement." The explanation had made sense to Sarah, who understood that professional bulls, like human athletes, eventually aged out of their competitive careers. But she remained unclear about what role she might play in such operations. "I also work with riders who are interested in developing their skills outside the official competition system," Rebecca had continued. "People who want to improve their techniques without the pressure and politics that come with organized events. And occasionally, I work with riders who have been excluded from official competition for reasons that don't necessarily reflect their actual abilities." The last statement had been delivered with careful emphasis, making clear that Rebecca understood exactly why Sarah might be interested in such opportunities, while avoiding direct reference to controversial topics. Sarah had considered the offer for several long moments, weighing the appeal of returning to the activity she had loved against the risks of reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. The ranch work that filled her days was satisfying in its own way, but it could never replace the unique challenge and exhilaration that came with bull riding. At the same time, her experience with the rodeo community had taught her to be deeply suspicious of opportunities that seemed too good to be true. "Why me?" she had finally asked. "There are plenty of qualified riders who don't come with the baggage I carry." Rebecca's smile had returned, though it now carried hints of understanding. That suggested personal experience with similar challenges. "Because you were never about the politics or the glory. Your riding spoke for itself, and people who understand the sport remember that even if they don't say it publicly. More importantly, the bulls I work with require someone who can connect with them on their level, not just someone who can stay on for 8 seconds. The conversation had continued for another 20 minutes, with Rebecca providing details about her facility and the types of projects she handled. Nothing about her proposal had involved official competition or public exposure that might attract unwanted attention. Instead, she described an environment focused purely on the relationship between rider and animal, where skills could be developed and maintained without the complex social dynamics that had destroyed Sarah's previous career. Sarah had not committed to anything during that initial conversation, but she had accepted Rebecca's business card and agreed to consider the opportunity. The woman had driven away without pressure or urgency, leaving Sarah alone with thoughts and possibilities she had not allowed herself to entertain in years. That evening, after completing her usual ranch duties, Sarah had found herself standing at her trailer window longer than usual, watching the distant lights of Billings and thinking about paths not taken. The business card remained on her small kitchen table, its presence a tangible reminder that the skills she had worked so hard to develop might still have value in contexts she had never considered. The decision to contact Rebecca had not come immediately. Sarah had spent several weeks researching the woman's background, learning that she operated exactly the kind of facility she had described. Former professional writers spoke highly of her work in online forums, praising her knowledge of animal behavior and her ability to create environments where both humans and bulls could develop their potential without the pressures that came with high-stakes competition. More importantly, Sarah had found no evidence that Rebecca Torres was connected to any of the people or organizations that had played roles in her professional destruction. The woman appeared to operate independently of the official rodeo establishment, working with clients who valued her expertise more than her connections within industry power structures. The phone call that finally established their working relationship had been brief and professional. Rebecca had invited Sarah to visit her facility for a weekend, with no obligations beyond evaluating whether the environment might suit her interests. Transportation and accommodation would be provided, and Sarah's current employer need never know about the trip if she preferred to keep the matter private. Tom Morrison had readily granted her the requested time off, expressing hope that she would return refreshed from what she described as a brief vacation to visit family in Texas. The lie had troubled her briefly, but she justified it as necessary. Protection for both herself and her employer, who might face difficult questions if her activities became publicly known. The drive to Rebecca's facility had taken her through landscapes that triggered powerful memories of her competition years. Small towns where she had once competed at local rodeos, highway rest stops where she had slept in her truck between events, truck stops where she had shared meals with other riders while discussing strategy and sharing war stories from various competitions. By the time she reached the Torres Training Center, located on 200 acres of rolling hills south of Austin, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had not experienced since her final competitive rides. The facility itself was impressive without being ostentatious, well-maintained buildings and equipment that spoke of serious purpose rather than casual hobby. Rebecca had greeted her with the same warmth she had displayed during their initial meeting, providing a tour that revealed extensive knowledge of both animal behavior and rider safety. The bulls maintained at the facility were indeed veterans of professional competition, animals whose names Sarah recognized from her own career. But they appeared content and well cared for, living in conditions that allowed them to express natural behaviors while remaining available for the specialized training programs Rebecca conducted. The other riders present during Sarah's visit came from diverse backgrounds, but shared common characteristics that she found immediately appealing. None were seeking fame or fortune from their involvement with bulls. Instead, they pursued the activity for its own sake, drawn by the same fundamental attraction that had originally motivated Sarah's interest in the sport. Conversations focused on technique and animal psychology rather than prize money or political maneuvering. Most significantly, none of them appeared to recognize Sarah or connect her with the controversies that had ended her professional career. She was simply another rider interested in developing her skills, welcomed into the group based on her obvious competence rather than her reputation or lack thereof. The first time she climbed onto a bull at Rebecca's facility, Sarah had expected the familiar rush of adrenaline and fear that had characterized her competition years. Instead, she found something entirely different, a sense of homecoming that was both exhilarating and deeply peaceful. The bull, an aging veteran named Thundercloud, who had once been considered among the most challenging animals in professional rodeo, responded to her presence with what seemed like recognition of a kindred spirit. The ride itself had been everything Sarah remembered and more. 8 seconds of perfect communication between human determination and animal power, A conversation conducted in the ancient language of balance and timing that transcended the need for words. When she dismounted, her smile was the first genuine expression of joy she had experienced in years. Rebecca had watched the ride with professional interest, making notes about both Sarah's technique and Thundercloud's response to her presence. Afterward, she had offered an observation that would prove prophetic. "You ride like someone who never forgot how. Just someone who hasn't had the right partners lately." The weekend visit had extended into a week as Sarah found herself reluctant to return to the routine of ranch work that had previously provided adequate satisfaction. Rebecca had offered her a standing invitation to return whenever she could arrange time away from her regular responsibilities, with the understanding that their arrangement would remain private and informal. Over the following months, Sarah had made the trip to Texas whenever Tom Morrison could spare her for a few days. Each visit had reinforced her connection to the activity that had once defined her identity, while the supportive environment Rebecca had created allowed her to rediscover the pure joy that had originally motivated her interest in bull riding. But it was during her fourth visit that Rebecca had approached her with a proposal that would change everything. "There's something I want to discuss with you," Rebecca had said one evening as they sat on the porch of the facility's main building, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. "Something that might interest you, though it would involve more risk than anything we've done so far." Sarah had looked up from the equipment catalog she had been reviewing, immediately alert to the serious tone in Rebecca's voice. Their previous conversations had been casual discussions of technique and animal behavior, comfortable exchanges between people who shared specialized knowledge. This felt different, weighted with implications that extended beyond their informal training relationship. "What kind of risk?" Sarah had asked, setting aside the catalog to give Rebecca her full attention. Rebecca had been quiet for several moments, apparently choosing her words with unusual care. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of excitement that came from someone who had discovered an opportunity that perfectly matched their interests with their capabilities. "There's a bull," she had said simply. "A bull that nobody can ride." Rebecca's words hung in the evening air like a challenge issued by the universe itself. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a stirring of emotions she had carefully buried beneath 4 years of deliberate monotony. The way Rebecca spoke about this mysterious bull carried undertones that suggested more than just another training opportunity. "Tell me about him," Sarah said quietly, her voice betraying none of the sudden intensity coursing through her veins. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting toward the corrals where the facility's bull stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. "His name is Devil's Backbone. He's 8 years old, prime of his life, bred specifically for bucking. His bloodline goes back to some of the most legendary bulls in rodeo history. On paper, he should be the perfect challenge for experienced riders." Sarah waited, sensing there was more to this story than bloodlines and breeding records. "The problem is that nobody has successfully ridden him for the full 8 seconds. Not once. In 3 years of competition, he's thrown every single rider who's tried. 47 attempts, 47 failures. The Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association has unofficially labeled him unrideable. Most event organizers won't even include him in their lineups anymore, because spectators get tired of watching 2-second rides." The implications began to crystallize in Sarah's mind. An unridden bull represented the ultimate challenge in professional rodeo, the kind of legend that drew riders from across the country, seeking to make their names by conquering the unconquerable. The fact that such an animal existed without anyone successfully mastering him suggested either extraordinary athletic ability or behavioral patterns that defied conventional riding techniques. "Where is he now?" Sarah asked, though she suspected. She already knew the answer. Rebecca's smile confirmed her intuition. "His owner contacted me last month." Devil's Backbone is scheduled to be retired from competition and sold to a breeding facility. But before that happens, the owner wants to give him one final opportunity to be ridden properly. He believes the bull deserves better than a legacy of defeating every challenger without ever experiencing what he was bred for, a genuine partnership with a skilled rider. Sarah felt her pulse quicken despite her efforts to maintain emotional distance from opportunities that might lead to disappointment. The romantic notion of giving a legendary bull one last chance at fulfilling his purpose appealed to something deep in her nature, the same instinct that had originally drawn her to seek harmony with animals that existed to test human courage and skill. "What makes you think I could succeed where 47 others have failed?" she asked, genuinely curious about Rebecca's reasoning. Rebecca turned to face her directly, her expression serious in the fading light. "Because you're not approaching this for the same reasons they were. Every rider who's attempted Devil's Backbone has been seeking personal glory, trying to add his name to the record books or prove something about their own abilities. They've treated him like an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to understand." The observation struck Sarah as profoundly accurate, reflecting insights into both animal psychology and human motivation that spoke to Rebecca's expertise in areas beyond simple training techniques. "I've watched you work with the bulls here," Rebecca continued. "You don't try to dominate them or force them into submission. You listen to what they're telling you through their movement patterns, their breathing, their energy levels. You adapt your approach to complement their natural behaviors rather than fighting against them." Sarah considered this assessment, recognizing the truth in Rebecca's words while simultaneously questioning whether such an approach could succeed with an animal that had confounded every previous attempt at partnership. When would this happen? She heard herself asking, surprised that she was already moving past whether to accept the challenge toward practical considerations of timing and logistics. The owner wants to arrange the attempt for next month, during the Billings County Fair. He thinks Devil's Backbone deserves an audience for what might be his final ride. People who understand the significance of what's being attempted. The mention of Billings sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. The Billings County Fair was her local event, the competition she could see from her trailer window on clear nights. It represented the geographic heart of the rodeo community that had rejected her, filled with people who would recognize her instantly and remember exactly why her name had become synonymous with controversy and disgrace. "That's not possible," Sarah said firmly. The practical realities of her situation reasserting themselves over romantic notions of redemption through extraordinary achievement. "I can't appear publicly at rodeo events. Too many people would recognize me, and my presence would create exactly the kind of spectacle that neither you nor the bull's owner would want." Rebecca nodded as if she had anticipated this objection. "The owner understands your situation. He's prepared to arrange a private session after the fair's official events conclude, but while the facilities are still available. Just you, the bull, and a small group of witnesses to verify what happens. No media, no publicity, no connection to any official competition records." The proposal was intriguing enough to merit serious consideration, but Sarah found herself hesitating for reasons that went beyond practical concerns about public exposure. The years since her exile from professional rodeo had been marked by gradual acceptance of her diminished circumstances, a carefully constructed peace built on avoiding situations that might reawaken ambitions she could no longer pursue. Taking on a challenge of this magnitude risked undermining the emotional equilibrium she had worked so hard to achieve. "I need time to think about this," she said finally, aware that her response sounded anticlimactic after the buildup of their conversation. Rebecca's expression showed no disappointment with Sarah's caution. "Of course, this isn't the kind of decision that should be made quickly, but I want you to understand something before you decide." Sarah waited for Rebecca to continue, sensing that whatever came next would be the most important part of their entire conversation. Devil's Backbone isn't just any bull. His breeding, his record, his reputation, they make him the kind of animal that defines careers. Successfully riding him wouldn't just be a personal victory. It would be a statement that excellence transcends politics, that true skill can't be destroyed by people who mistake power for authority. The words resonated with longings Sarah had spent years trying to suppress. The idea that she might have an opportunity to demonstrate her abilities in their purest form, removed from the social dynamics and institutional prejudices that had destroyed her career, awakened possibilities she had trained herself not to consider. But even as part of her responded with fierce enthusiasm to the challenge Rebecca described, another part recognized the dangers inherent in allowing herself to hope for outcomes that remained fundamentally uncertain. Devil's Backbone had defeated riders whose skills and experience exceeded her own. Nothing guaranteed that her approach would succeed where others had failed, and failure in such a high-profile attempt might serve only to confirm the narratives that had been constructed around her supposed inadequacies. The conversation continued for another hour as Rebecca provided additional details about Devil's Backbone's history and behavioral patterns. The bull had been bred by the legendary Mackenzie Ranch in Wyoming, known for producing animals that challenged the sport's greatest riders while maintaining reputations for fairness and consistency. His sire, Tornado Joe, had achieved legendary status during a career that spanned 7 years and included appearances at the National Finals Rodeo. His dam came from bloodlines that had produced champions across multiple generations. Devil's Backbone's own career had begun with promise that seemed to validate his exceptional breeding. Early rides in smaller venues had showcased spectacular bucking abilities combined with the kind of predictable patterns that allowed skilled riders to anticipate his movements. But as he matured and advanced to higher levels of competition, something had changed in his approach to carrying riders. "It's like he learned from every encounter," Rebecca explained, reviewing notes she had compiled from conversations with various riders and stock contractors who had worked with the bull. Each time someone tried a particular technique or strategy, he adapted his response to neutralize that approach. Now he seems to anticipate what riders will do before they do it. The description painted a picture of an animal whose intelligence matched his physical capabilities, creating challenges that went beyond simple strength or athletic ability. Sarah found herself intrigued by the psychological dimensions of what Rebecca described. The suggestion that Devil's Backbone had evolved into something approaching a thinking opponent rather than merely a force of nature to be endured. "Has anyone tried approaching him differently?" Sarah asked. "I mean, if conventional techniques have proven ineffective, maybe the solution lies in abandoning conventional approaches altogether." Rebecca's nod suggested she had been hoping Sarah would reach exactly that conclusion. "That's precisely why I thought of you. Your riding style has always been more intuitive than systematic, more about partnership than conquest. If anyone could find a way to communicate with Devil's Backbone on his terms rather than imposing human expectations on him, it would be someone with your particular gifts." The compliment was gratifying, but Sarah remained focused on the practical aspects of what was being proposed. "When would I need to give you an answer?" "The owner needs confirmation within 2 weeks to arrange the logistics. The Billings County Fair ends on a Sunday night, and he's hoping to schedule the attempt for the following Tuesday evening, when the grounds will be empty except for essential personnel." Sarah committed the timeline to memory while calculating how such an arrangement might affect her responsibilities at Triple Diamond Ranch. Tom Morrison had always been accommodating about time-off requests, but disappearing for several days without adequate notice might strain even his generous understanding of work-life balance. More challenging would be explaining her absence in ways that didn't invite uncomfortable questions about her activities. The carefully constructed privacy she had built around her current life depended on maintaining separation between her past and present identities. Participating in anything related to professional bull riding, even in unofficial capacities, risked exposing connections she had worked hard to obscure. The drive back to Montana provided Sarah with hours of uninterrupted time to consider Rebecca's proposal from multiple angles. The logical arguments against accepting the challenge were compelling and numerous. She had been away from serious competition for 4 years, a significant gap that had likely dulled reflexes and instincts that required constant maintenance to remain sharp. Devil's Backbone represented a level of difficulty that even current professional riders couldn't master, making success unlikely for someone whose skills had been dormant for so long. More fundamentally, the entire enterprise carried risks that extended far beyond physical injury. If word of her attempt reached the broader rodeo community, it might trigger renewed scrutiny of the circumstances that had ended her career. People who had accepted her disappearance from public view might begin asking questions about her current activities and whereabouts. The peaceful anonymity she had cultivated at Triple Diamond could be shattered by association with events that reminded people of her controversial past. But despite these rational concerns, Sarah found herself unable to dismiss the opportunity entirely. The years since her departure from professional rodeo had been marked by a gradual dimming of the fire that had once driven her to pursue seemingly impossible goals. Ranch work provided satisfaction and stability, but it had never replaced the unique fulfillment that came from testing herself against challenges that demanded every ounce of skill and courage she possessed. Devil's Backbone represented exactly such a challenge, elevated to an almost mythical level by his record of invincibility. The opportunity to face an opponent that had confounded the sport's best riders appealed to something fundamental in Sarah's nature, the same instinct that had originally drawn her to seek partnership with animals bred specifically to test human limits. More intriguingly, Rebecca's description of Devil's Backbone's evolution suggested that success might require the kind of adaptive intelligence that Sarah had always considered her greatest strength as a rider. While other competitors relied heavily on learned techniques and established strategies, she had built her reputation on the ability to read individual animals and adjust her approach based on subtle cues that others missed entirely. The possibility that her particular skills might be precisely what was needed to solve the puzzle that Devil's Backbone represented was tantalizing enough to override many of her practical concerns. If she could indeed find a way to communicate with the bull on his terms, rather than trying to impose conventional riding approaches, the achievement would validate everything she had believed about the importance of partnership over domination in human-animal relationships. By the time Sarah reached the outskirts of Billings, she had made her decision. The risks were real and significant, but the potential rewards, both personal and philosophical, justified accepting them. More importantly, she recognized that she would regret declining the opportunity more than she would regret failing in the attempt. The following morning brought a phone call to Rebecca, confirming her acceptance of the challenge, along with a request for additional information about Devil's Backbone's specific behavioral patterns and any video footage that might be available from his previous rides. Rebecca's excitement was audible even through the poor connection that characterized cell phone service in rural Montana, and she promised to compile a comprehensive package of materials within the week. The conversation concluded with arrangements for Sarah to return to the Texas facility for intensive preparation sessions that would help her adjust to the physical and mental demands of facing a bull of Devil's Backbone's caliber. Rebecca emphasized that the preparation period would be crucial, not just for refreshing Sarah's competitive skills, but for developing strategies specifically tailored to the unique challenges that Devil's Backbone presented. Ending the call, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that she had not experienced since her championship season. The sensation was both exhilarating and unsettling, a reminder of how much her emotional landscape had changed during the years of self-imposed exile from the sport that had once defined her identity. The next 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness as Sarah waited for the preparation materials Rebecca had promised while maintaining her regular duties at Triple Diamond Ranch. Her conversations with Tom Morrison about requesting additional time off were casual and indirect, laying groundwork for an absence request that would come closer to her departure date. The package from Rebecca arrived on a Thursday afternoon via overnight delivery, its contents more comprehensive than Sarah had dared hope. Video footage from 17 of Devil's Backbone's rides provided multiple angles and slow-motion analysis of his movement patterns. Veterinary reports documented his physical condition and noted characteristics that might influence his bucking style. Most valuable were detailed interviews with 5 of the riders who had attempted to master him, their descriptions of his techniques offering insights that purely visual analysis couldn't provide. Sarah spent her evening studying the materials with the intensity of a graduate student preparing for comprehensive examinations. Devil's Backbone's approach to unseating riders was indeed more sophisticated than typical bull behavior, incorporating elements of timing and misdirection that suggested genuine strategic thinking rather than mere instinctive aggression. The bull's signature move appeared to be a sharp directional change executed at precisely the moment when riders committed their weight to anticipating continued movement in the previous direction. This technique was devastatingly effective against riders who relied on reading early cues to predict subsequent movements, since Devil's Backbone had learned to provide false signals that led riders into preparation for maneuvers he had no intention of executing. More concerning was the pattern of psychological warfare that emerged from studying multiple rides. Devil's Backbone seemed to sense when riders became frustrated with his deceptions, timing his most violent maneuvers to coincide with moments of human confusion or doubt. Several riders reported feeling as though the bull was actively studying their responses and adjusting his strategy accordingly. The videos also revealed something that the written reports had not adequately conveyed. Devil's Backbone was exceptionally beautiful in motion, his movements combining raw power with an almost balletic grace that made his bucking sequences visually spectacular, even when they resulted in failed rides. Sarah found herself developing genuine admiration for the animal's abilities, appreciation that went beyond simple respect for a worthy opponent. This emotional connection proved important when she returned to Rebecca's facility for what they had agreed would be her final preparation period before the attempt at Devil's Backbone. The bulls available for training included several whose bucking styles incorporated elements similar to those that made Devil's Backbone so formidable, allowing Sarah to practice techniques specifically designed to counter his signature deceptions. The physical demands of returning to serious training were more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. 4 years of ranch work had maintained her general fitness and core strength, but the specific muscle groups and reflexes required for professional bull riding had deteriorated more than she had realized. The first training session left her exhausted and sore in ways that reminded her how much her body had forgotten about the sport's requirements. But muscle memory proved remarkably persistent, and within 3 days, Sarah found herself adapting to the familiar rhythms of preparation and performance that had once governed her daily routine. More encouraging was the discovery that her ability to read individual animals and adjust her approach accordingly had not diminished during her years away from competition. Working with a bull named Midnight Express, whose unpredictable direction changes had earned him a reputation as a smaller-scale version of Devil's Backbone, Sarah began developing strategies that emphasized adaptability over anticipation. Instead of trying to predict the bull's next move, she focused on maintaining balance and position that would allow her to respond effectively to whatever movement actually occurred. The approach required abandoning many of the conventional techniques that formed the foundation of professional bull riding, substituting fluid responsiveness for the rigid preparation that most riders relied upon. It was mentally and physically exhausting, demanding constant attention to subtle changes in the animal's movement patterns, while maintaining the strength and balance necessary to absorb powerful directional changes. But by the end of her first week of intensive training, Sarah had successfully completed 8-second rides on 3 different bulls whose behavioral patterns incorporated elements that had proved devastating to other riders. More importantly, she had begun to understand the philosophical shift that success with Devil's Backbone would require. "You're riding like you're having a conversation rather than trying to win an argument," Rebecca observed after watching Sarah's session with a particularly challenging bull named Storm Warning. "That's exactly the mindset you'll need with Devil's Backbone." The comment crystallized something Sarah had been sensing but not quite articulating about her evolving approach. Traditional bull riding emphasized the rider's dominance over the animal, the assertion of human will over natural force. But the strategy she was developing relied on partnership and mutual respect, seeking harmony rather than conquest. It was a philosophy that aligned perfectly with her natural instincts, while departing radically from conventional competitive approaches. The realization that her success might depend on abandoning orthodoxy in favor of intuition was both liberating and terrifying, since it meant trusting abilities that couldn't be taught or practiced in any systematic way. During her second week at Rebecca's facility, word arrived that the arrangements for confronting Devil's Backbone had been finalized. The attempt would take place on Tuesday evening, August 15th, at the Billings County Fairgrounds. A small group of witnesses would be present to verify the result, but no media coverage or official recording would occur. Sarah would have one opportunity to achieve what 47 previous riders had failed to accomplish. The news transformed her remaining preparation time from gradual skill development into urgent final rehearsal. Every training session became a dress rehearsal for the most important 8 seconds of her life. Every successful ride a building block of confidence for the ultimate challenge that awaited her. But it was during her final training session that Sarah encountered an unexpected obstacle that threatened to undermine everything she had worked toward. Rebecca had arranged for her to practice with a bull named Thunder Canyon, whose size and temperament most closely approximated Devil's Backbone's characteristics. The ride itself went well, 8 seconds of controlled partnership that demonstrated her readiness for the challenge ahead. But as Sarah dismounted and began walking toward the arena exit, she noticed a familiar figure leaning against the fence rail, watching her with an expression that combined surprise with something approaching calculation. Marcus Hendricks, a former competitor from her championship days, stood just outside the practice arena with the kind of focused attention that suggested he had been observing her session for some time. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized not just Marcus himself, but the implications of his presence. Hendricks had never been a top-tier rider, but he had always been well connected within the rodeo community's social networks. More problematically, he had been present at several events during her final season, including competitions where rumors about her supposed misconduct had first begun circulating. If Marcus recognized her and connected her current activities with her controversial past, the carefully maintained privacy that protected both her current life and her upcoming attempt with Devil's Backbone could be shattered before she ever had the opportunity to prove herself. Sarah maintained her composure as she approached the area where Marcus stood, hoping that 4 years and significant changes in her appearance might be enough to avoid recognition. But his expression as she drew closer made clear that her identity was not in question. "Sarah Mitchell," Marcus said as she reached the fence line, his voice carrying complex emotions that were difficult to interpret. "I heard rumors that you might still be riding somewhere, but I never expected to find you here." The statement confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the potential consequences of her return to serious training. If Marcus had heard rumors about her activities, Other people within the rodeo community might also be aware that she had not completely disappeared from the sport. "Hello, Marcus," she replied evenly, declining to provide any information about her current circumstances or future plans. Marcus studied her for several moments, apparently weighing his response to their unexpected encounter. "You look good," he said finally. "Different but good. Riding as well as ever, from what I could see." The observation was neutral enough to suggest that he might not harbor hostile intentions, but Sarah remained wary of revealing anything that might compromise her upcoming attempt with Devil's Backbone. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "Are you still competing?" Marcus shook his head with a rueful smile. "Retired last year after one too many injuries reminded me that I'm not 25 anymore. These days, I work with stock contractors, helping evaluate new bulls and occasionally scouting for riders who might be good matches for particular animals." The explanation clarified his presence at Rebecca's facility while simultaneously raising new concerns about his potential knowledge of Sarah's upcoming challenge. Stock contractors formed a tight-knit community within professional rodeo, sharing information about riders, animals, and business opportunities with the kind of informal efficiency that made maintaining secrets extremely difficult. "That sounds like interesting work," Sarah said, hoping to conclude their conversation before it moved in directions that might require her to reveal more than she was comfortable sharing. But Marcus seemed disinclined to let the encounter end so easily. "Actually, your timing is perfect. I've been working with a stock contractor who has a bull that nobody's been able to ride. Real legend in the making, if someone could figure out how to stay on him for 8 seconds. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized where Marcus's comments were leading. The coincidence was too specific to be accidental. He was almost certainly referring to Devil's Backbone, which meant he knew about the upcoming attempt and might even be connected to its organization. "Really?" she said, maintaining neutral interest while her mind raced through the implications of his knowledge. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Bull named Devil's Backbone. Unridden in 3 years of professional competition. The owner is planning one final attempt to get him ridden before retiring him to breeding. Should be quite a spectacle." The confirmation that Marcus was indeed aware of the upcoming challenge created a new set of complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated. His presence at Rebecca's facility couldn't be coincidental, which meant he had probably been specifically sent to evaluate her suitability for the attempt. "Sounds like a significant challenge," she said, still avoiding any admission of her own involvement. Marcus's smile suggested he was enjoying their verbal dance around topics they both understood, but neither was directly acknowledging. The kind of challenge that would interest someone with your particular talents. Assuming, of course, that someone was still interested in proving that true skill transcends whatever politics might have complicated their career. The statement was as close to a direct invitation as Marcus was likely to offer, making clear that he not only knew about the Devil's Backbone opportunity, but was actively encouraging her participation. Sarah realized that her careful efforts to maintain secrecy around the attempt had been largely pointless. The rodeo community's informal networks had already identified her as a potential candidate. "I suppose that would depend on the specific circumstances," she said, tacitly acknowledging her interest while avoiding direct commitment. Marcus reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a business card, which he extended towards Sarah with the casual gesture of someone completing a transaction that had been predetermined by larger forces. "The owner would like to meet with you tomorrow evening to discuss the possibility. Details are on the card. Nothing official, nothing public. Just a conversation between people who understand what it means to give a great bull the rider he deserves." Sarah accepted the card, glancing at its contents long enough to note an address in Billings, and a time 7 o'clock the following evening. The meeting location was listed as Morrison Ranch, which she realized with a jolt was probably related to her own employer, Tom Morrison. though she had never heard him mention any involvement with stock contracting or bull breeding. "I'll consider it," she said, pocketing the card while maintaining the pretense that her participation remained uncertain. Marcus nodded as if her response had been exactly what he expected. "Hope to see you there, Sarah. It's time people remembered what you're really capable of." With that cryptic comment, he turned and walked toward a pickup truck parked near the facility's main building, leaving Sarah alone with the realization that her carefully planned private challenge had become something much more complicated than she had anticipated. The drive back to Montana took on an entirely different character as Sarah contemplated the implications of her encounter with Marcus. The upcoming attempt with Devil's Backbone was clearly not the small private affair that Rebecca had described. Instead, it appeared to be connected to networks within the rodeo community that included people who remembered her controversial departure from professional competition. More unsettling was the possibility that her own employer might be involved in arrangements she had assumed were being made by strangers. Tom Morrison had never indicated any awareness of her background in rodeo, but the shared surname between him and the ranch where tomorrow's meeting was scheduled could not be coincidental. By the time Sarah reached her trailer at Triple Diamond Ranch, she had resolved to attend the meeting regardless of whatever complications it might reveal. The opportunity to ride Devil's Backbone represented more than just a personal challenge. It had become a chance to demonstrate that her abilities had never depended on the political considerations that had destroyed her career. But as she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah found herself wondering whether she was walking into a trap designed by people who had never forgiven her for achievements they believed she had not deserved. The years of peaceful anonymity at Triple Diamond had perhaps made her too trusting of opportunities that seemed to offer exactly what she most desired. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether her return to serious bull riding represented a genuine second chance or merely another form of the systematic humiliation that had driven her from professional competition 4 years earlier. The decision to attend would define not just her immediate future, but her understanding of whether redemption was possible for someone whose reputation had been destroyed by forces beyond her control. As dawn approached, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling of her trailer, weighing the risks of hope against the certainty of regret. If she chose the safety of continued obscurity over the dangerous possibility of vindication. The Morrison Ranch main house sat atop a gentle rise overlooking pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains, its wraparound porch and weathered log construction speaking to generations of careful stewardship. Sarah drove up the gravel road with mounting apprehension, still processing the possibility that her employer of 4 years might be connected to the very opportunity that had drawn her back toward professional bull riding. Tom Morrison himself answered the door, his expression confirming what Sarah had begun to suspect during the sleepless night following her encounter with Marcus Hendricks. The surprise on his face appeared genuine, but beneath it lay something that suggested their meeting was not entirely unexpected. "Sarah," he said, stepping aside to gesture her into the house. "I was wondering when this conversation would finally happen." The interior of the Morrison house reflected the same practical elegance as its exterior, with furnishings that prioritized comfort and functionality over display. But Sarah's attention was immediately drawn to the wall above the fireplace, where photographs and memorabilia created a shrine to Morrison family involvement in professional rodeo spanning multiple decades. "You never mentioned your rodeo connections," Sarah said, studying images that included several featuring bulls she recognized from her own competition years. Tom's laugh carried notes of irony and understanding. "You never mentioned yours either. Though I had my suspicions from the first week you worked here. Nobody handles cattle the way you do without having spent serious time around bucking stock." The admission shifted their relationship onto entirely new ground, revealing that the protective anonymity Sarah had believed she was maintaining had been largely illusory. But Tom's tone suggested curiosity rather than hostility, opening possibilities. for honest conversation that she had not expected. "Marcus Hendricks called yesterday," Tom continued, settling into a leather chair that faced the collection of rodeo photographs. "Said he'd found the perfect rider for Devil's Backbone, someone with the right combination of skill and motivation to give the old boy a proper send-off." Sarah took the chair opposite him, her mind racing through the implications of revelations that were reshaping her understanding of recent events. "How long have you known who I am?" "Since about your third day on the job. You diagnosed a breeding problem in our prize heifer that took the veterinarian another week to confirm. That level of livestock knowledge doesn't come from casual ranch experience." The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours, during which Tom revealed the extent of his family's involvement in stock contracting and bull breeding. Devil's Backbone had been bred at Morrison Ranch, though he had been sold as a yearling to the Wyoming operation that had developed him into a professional competitor. Tom had followed the bull's career with particular interest, taking pride in the genetic legacy that had produced such an exceptional animal. When Devil's Backbone's current owner contacted me about arranging a final attempt to get him ridden, I suggested he might want to consider some unconventional options, Tom explained. "The best professional riders have all failed with him. Maybe it was time to try someone who approached the challenge differently." Sarah felt pieces of a complex puzzle clicking into place as she understood how her own presence at Triple Diamond Ranch had influenced events she had assumed were driven by coincidence. "You recommended me specifically?" Tom nodded without hesitation. "I've watched you work with difficult animals for 4 years. You have something that can't be taught, the ability to understand what an animal needs from you, rather than what you want from them. Devil's Backbone has been looking for a partner, not a conqueror." The perspective reframed everything Sarah thought she understood about the opportunity that had brought her to this moment. Rather than representing a chance discovery by strangers, her selection for the Devil's Backbone challenge had resulted from years of observation by someone who understood both her abilities and the unique requirements of the situation. "There's something else you should know," Tom said, his tone becoming more serious. "Devil's Backbone's owner isn't just interested in getting him ridden one final time. He's looking for someone to take over the bull's care during his retirement years. Someone who understands what made him special and can ensure he lives out his remaining years with the respect he's earned." The proposal was unexpected and emotionally overwhelming. Sarah had assumed that success with Devil's Backbone would represent an endpoint, a single moment of vindication before returning to her carefully constructed life of anonymity. The possibility of ongoing connection to such a legendary animal opened futures she had not dared to consider. "What would that involve?" she asked, trying to maintain rational evaluation of an opportunity that appealed to every dream she had been forced to abandon. Tom's smile suggested he had been hoping for exactly that question. "Full-time position managing the retirement program for elite bucking stock. Good salary, housing provided, complete independence in making decisions. About animal care and breeding programs. Based here at Morrison Ranch, working with bulls that most people only dream about getting close to." The offer was generous beyond anything Sarah could have imagined, but she found herself hesitating for reasons that went beyond simple caution about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. "What about the people who destroyed my career? They won't just disappear because I found a new position." Tom's expression hardened with something approaching anger. "That's exactly why this opportunity matters so much. Success with Devil's Backbone would prove what everyone in this business already knows, but has been afraid to say publicly, that you were railroaded by people who couldn't tolerate excellence that didn't fit their narrow ideas about who deserved recognition." The conversation concluded with arrangements for Sarah to meet Devil's Backbone the following morning, allowing her to assess the animal before committing to the attempt that would determine both their futures. Tom provided keys to the ranch's stock handling facilities and detailed information about the bull's care requirements and behavioral patterns. Driving back to her trailer that evening, Sarah felt the weight of possibilities that extended far beyond the 8 seconds she would spend trying to ride an unrideable bull. The opportunity Tom had described represented everything she had lost 4 years earlier: professional recognition, financial security, and the chance to work with elite animals in environments that valued expertise over politics. But it also represented enormous risk. Failure with Devil's Backbone would not merely confirm her inability to perform at the highest levels. It would demonstrate that failure in front of people who remembered her controversial departure from professional competition. Success, on the other hand, might trigger renewed scrutiny of the circumstances that had ended her career, potentially exposing truths that powerful people had worked hard to bury. The following morning brought crystalline weather that seemed designed for momentous occasions. Sarah arrived at Morrison Ranch before dawn, using the keys Tom had provided to access the specialized facilities where Devil's Backbone was housed. The bull stood alone in a large paddock that allowed him room to move freely while maintaining secure containment. Her first impression was of an animal that embodied everything legendary about professional rodeo stock. Devil's Backbone stood nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, his black coat gleaming with health and careful grooming. But it was his eyes that captured Sarah's attention: intelligent, assessing, carrying what seemed like weary patience with the endless stream of humans who approached him with conquest in mind. Sarah spent an hour simply observing the bull from outside his enclosure, studying his movement patterns and energy levels without any attempt at direct interaction. Devil's Backbone seemed equally interested in studying her, approaching the fence periodically to examine this new human who didn't immediately begin making demands on his attention. When she finally entered his paddock, Sarah moved with deliberate slowness, allowing the bull to adjust to her presence without feeling pressured or challenged. Devil's Backbone watched her approach with calm attention, neither aggressive nor particularly welcoming, simply alert to possibilities that her behavior might reveal. The connection, when it came, was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah had positioned herself near the center of the paddock, standing quietly while Devil's Backbone completed his assessment of her intentions. After several minutes, the bull approached to within arm's length, close enough for her to observe the intelligence in his eyes while he evaluated her worthiness as a potential partner. "You're tired of being misunderstood, aren't you?" Sarah said softly, her voice carrying empathy rather than false familiarity. "Everyone who climbs on your back wants to prove something about themselves. Nobody asks what you might need from the experience." Devil's Backbone's response was almost imperceptible, a slight relaxation in his posture that suggested recognition of something different in her approach. Sarah remained motionless, allowing the bull to complete his evaluation without pressure or expectation. The breakthrough came when Devil's Backbone stepped closer, bringing his massive head within inches of Sarah's shoulder. She could feel his breath, warm and steady, as he examined her scent and energy with the thoroughness of an expert judge evaluating potential partnerships. "We're both carrying reputations we didn't earn," Sarah continued, her voice maintaining the same gentle cadence. "Maybe it's time we showed people what we're really capable of when we work together instead of against each other." The bull's acceptance was communicated through body language rather than dramatic gestures. Devil's Backbone simply stood beside her, calm and present, demonstrating the kind of peaceful coexistence that had proven impossible with 47 previous riders who had approached him as an adversary to be conquered. Sarah spent the remainder of the morning in Devil's Backbone's paddock, gradually introducing elements of physical contact that would be necessary during an actual ride. The bull accepted her touch with patient tolerance, allowing her to understand his responses to various types of pressure and positioning. By noon, she had reached a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Devil's Backbone was indeed an extraordinary animal, but his legendary status resulted from the inability of previous riders to recognize what he was offering: partnership rather than domination, communication rather than conquest. The formal attempt was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening, after the Billings County Fair concluded and the grounds could be cleared for private use. Sarah spent the intervening days in intensive preparation, both physical and mental, while wrestling with excitement and anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained emotional equilibrium. The evening of the attempt arrived with weather that seemed ordained for historic occasions. Clear skies and minimal wind created optimal conditions for what everyone present understood would be either spectacular success or confirmation that Devil's Backbone truly was unrideable. The group of witnesses was small but significant, including Tom Morrison, Marcus Hendricks, Devil's Backbone's current owner, and 2 officials whose presence would verify whatever occurred for record-keeping purposes. No media representatives were present, honoring the private nature of the arrangement. Sarah completed her preparation rituals with methodical precision, checking equipment that could mean the difference between success and serious injury. But her focus remained primarily on mental preparation, visualizing the ride not as conquest, but as conversation between equals seeking temporary harmony. Devil's Backbone entered the chute with calm professionalism, demonstrating none of the aggressive energy that characterized many bulls preparing for rides. His demeanor suggested understanding that this attempt would be different from previous encounters, though whether that difference would favor success remained unknown. Sarah settled onto Devil's Backbone's broad back with movements that emphasized partnership over dominance. The bull's initial response was assessment rather than immediate aggression, as if he were testing her commitment to the collaborative approach they had established during their morning sessions. The gate opened, and Devil's Backbone exploded into motion with power that justified every story told about his legendary abilities. But Sarah was ready for partnership rather than warfare, moving with the bull's energy instead of fighting against it, anticipating his needs rather than trying to impose her will. The first 4 seconds passed in perfect harmony, human and animal working together to create something that transcended mere athletic achievement. Devil's Backbone's movements were spectacular but controlled, demonstrating his capabilities while allowing Sarah to maintain position through adaptation rather than force. At the 5-second mark, Devil's Backbone attempted his signature deception, the false signal that had defeated every previous rider. But Sarah had been expecting collaboration rather than conquest, reading his intentions through partnership, rather than trying to anticipate aggression that wasn't there. The 6th and 7th seconds unfolded like a dance choreographed by mutual respect, each partner contributing their strengths to create performance that elevated both beyond their individual capabilities. Devil's Backbone showcased power and grace that had been constrained by previous encounters with riders who treated him as an enemy, while Sarah demonstrated skills that transcended technique to become art. The 8-second buzzer sounded just as Devil's Backbone completed a maneuver that had unseated dozens of championship riders. But Sarah remained perfectly positioned, her balance maintained through understanding rather than strength, her connection to the bull preserved through partnership rather than domination. The dismount was flawless, Sarah landing safely while Devil's Backbone stood quietly nearby, both partners having achieved something that redefined what was possible when extraordinary individuals found ways to complement rather than compete with each other. The silence that followed was absolute, broken finally by spontaneous applause from witnesses who understood they had observed something historic. Devil's Backbone had been ridden successfully for the first time in 3 years, but more importantly, he had found a partner worthy of his legendary abilities. Tom Morrison approached Sarah with a smile that contained years of vindication for his faith in her abilities. "That was the most beautiful ride I've ever witnessed," he said simply. Devil's Backbone looked like he was finally doing what he was born for. The formal offer came that evening, presented in Tom's living room, surrounded by the same rodeo Photographs that had initially revealed the depth of Morrison family involvement in professional stock contracting. Full-time position managing elite bucking stock retirement programs, salary generous enough to provide security she had never experienced, and most importantly, the opportunity to work with animals whose legendary status matched her own love for the sport. Sarah accepted without hesitation, understanding that her 8 seconds aboard Devil's Backbone had opened doors that extended far beyond personal vindication. The partnership they had demonstrated would serve as proof that excellence transcended politics, that true skill could overcome systematic prejudice when given proper opportunity. The story of Sarah Mitchell and Devil's Backbone spread through rodeo circles with the speed that only legends achieve. But this time, the narrative focused on partnership rather than controversy, demonstrating what became possible when extraordinary individuals found ways to complement each other's strengths. Devil's Backbone lived out his retirement years in comfort and respect at Morrison Ranch, his legacy secure as the bull who had waited 3 years for a rider worthy of partnership. Sarah built a program that became the gold standard for managing elite bucking stock, her reputation eventually overshadowing the controversies that had once defined her public image. Years later, young riders would visit Morrison Ranch to learn from the woman who had solved the puzzle that confounded 47 professional competitors. Sarah would tell them that success came not from conquering their animals, but from understanding what those animals needed from the partnership. Devil's Backbone would stand in his pasture during these lessons, his presence serving as testimony to the power of partnership over domination, proof that legends are born when extraordinary individuals find ways to elevate each other beyond what either could achieve alone. The 8 seconds that changed everything had lasted no longer than any successful bull ride, but their impact created ripples that transformed understanding of what became possible when respect replaced conquest as the foundation for human-animal partnerships in professional rodeo. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.